Welcome to the Conversation Lab. My name is Don Schaefer. This radio program and podcast can be heard weekly at CFRO-FM or Coopradio in Vancouver, and of course online on your favorite podcasting platform. A couple years ago, when I was working on my master's degree, I went down this rabbit hole called climate change and wrote a paper called Climate Change and the Many Faces of Denial. The fun part for me was being able to introduce so many scientists, academics, and experts that looked at all the different faces of climate change and all of its different parts. And as typical with this show, we are reaching around the world, and today we have Tero Mustonen, who's the director of the Arctic NGO and the Snow Change Cooperative. He's co-authored a study called The Biodiversity Redistribution Under Climate Change, Impacts on Ecosystems and Human Well-Being, and it was just published in Science magazine. Tero, thank you very much for joining us. I know it's the other end of the day where you are. I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about the study.
Yeah, thanks for the question. This is a large global analytical view done by over 30 scientists in Hong Kong, Australia, US, Canada, Finland, and many other places. Well, where we were trying to look at two things. One, how does climate change affect species on the move, or if you want to call it more academically, what's happening with biodiversity and climate change? And the second part of the paper that we have just released in Science talks about the responses. What are the kind of things that we could try to do to answer to the universal redistribution of life on Earth? And so that's essentially the core of the paper, these two drivers.
I'm curious how difficult it is to find scientists all over the world to work together on a project like this.
Yeah, this all began a few years ago when some of the scholars over there in Tasmania, Australia, led by Professor Greta Peckel, started to organize a huge scientific conference called Species on the Move. And this was a global event, first of its kind, that took place about 1 year ago. And that featured over 500 leading natural scientists and then a handful of social scientists and indigenous peoples representatives to discuss what's actually going on in the light of the latest science and the research that's being done. And then from that event or from that conference a year ago, we then worked for the past 12 months to assess and try to point and make clear the impact that climate change is having on nature. Because many times what's going on is that climate change is being assessed and understood almost like a weather forecast. You'll get the usual, it will get 2 to 4 degrees warmer or things like that. One of the things we wanted to do with this paper was to try to actually say something about the impact on nature, species, plants, animals, and also the responses that society needs to take and put in place to survive this century.
Now, is the Snow Change Cooperative your idea? Is that a larger group?
Snow Change was founded 17 years ago by Inuits and Sami and some of the Finns who had great concern over the fact that, of course, Arctic has been often called the so-called canary bird of climate change due to the fact that many of the changes underway here are only starting to happen in other parts of the planet. And that's why the Snow Change was founded. And yes, I was one of the people to be involved in that. And since that, it has grown into a global organization with over 2,000 people in the communities that form our community network and steering committee. And then we have 29 indigenous and local traditional leaders that are working from Siberia to Alaska, Scandinavia, Australia, Maori, in New Zealand, and many other places to try to do something new. So Snow Change has two mandates: to do research and also work with the idea that we should be revitalizing and supporting indigenous and traditional communities.
Now, it's the middle of the day here. Where have I found you?
Yeah, I'm greetings to everybody from the evening, from the future in Finland. It's 9:30 here, and I'm sitting here in the boreal village of Selkie in North Karelia at the Russian border, and we still have about 2 feet of snow. So when I just came back from Vancouver on Friday, things were looking much more like a spring, but now back home we are dealing with a fair amount of snow, and it's still the winter conditions.
So when do you expect to see springtime?
Well, of course, spring is underway, and this particular winter here has been quite hard on our fisheries as well. The ice conditions are one of the indicators in the boreal and in the Arctic of how how severe the changes are, and this winter has been one of the most significant in terms of low quality of ice. That means that there are low pressures that cause the ice conditions to be rather bad, and also the fluctuation of temperature, so that you can have in a day minus 35 to plus 2 events, and that's within 12 hours. And those are the kind of things that are underway here in the Eurasian North.
Now, is that unusual, or is that normal, or is that a different kind of winter for you?
Well, this is very different, and now you could say part of the work that Snow Change is doing is that we are also running a commercial fishery and work with a range of seal hunters and fisheries people in Siberia. And in some parts of Siberia, the temperatures have been plus 20 degrees warmer than usual this winter. And very often you'll hear both from the scientists and the traditional communities that it was the year 1985, which was sort of 86, that was considered to be the last of the stable ice conditions and the winters here in the north. So we have seen roughly 30 years of fluctuation and constant change. That's obviously reflecting then on the people and subsistence patterns and economies and things like that.
I have to ask I guess a couple of questions. One is, what is the climate like amongst the population in Finland? Is there a consciousness about climate change, or is it the same everywhere, or is it different in your country?
Yeah, that's a very good question. About 3 years ago, there was an international article appearing in Foreign Policy magazine, which is one of the big sort of U.S. political science magazines, and they made the argument that Finland actually stands out within Europe due to the fact that it's split roughly in half. This is very different, for example, compared to Sweden. That due to our remoteness, and I think many people will know that our language is a non-Indo-European language, so we don't really access the Norwegian or Swedish family of societies. So we stand out a little bit here in the north due to our history and culture. And we tend to be, in terms of economy, also very dependent on the resource extraction. And therefore, climate change response and awareness tends to be still quite low. Many people think that it might be not happening, or they don't want to link the kind of land use practices and things underway here with the worsening climate conditions.
So it sounds like it's the same there as it is here.
Yeah, often they say Canada and Finland are actually quite similar in terms of economy due to their northern locations, large land mass, and then now I have to be, of course, careful because I have been living in Vancouver and Victoria for many years, so I'm very aware of the social fabric and the fantastic cultural life over there. But then you have huge areas of the north in Canada as well that are remote with few communities in between. And obviously, in the past, this has stimulated a lot of natural resources extraction, exactly like here. So I think I would say that this is one of the reasons why like many people say, that climate change of today actually takes place due to the land use of the past. The mining, oil and gas and timber and things like that are contributing to the crisis today, because there has been so much of that natural resources extraction.
The reason I asked that question, Tero, is because there's this complex. I guess it's called the faraway complex, or it's not here, so it's far away, so it's not our problem. But what's interesting is you've just really brought our world a lot closer by talking about the similarities between Finland and Canada. I'm curious what brought you to this climate change discussion? How did you get involved with it?
Yeah, I first started to pay attention and become aware myself roughly in early 1990s when I went to the army, and I was in the army in the Arctic, and I would start to see a lot of the kind of new winters and melting, and then I also have the fortune of coming from a fishing family, so a lot of the fishermen and the community people started to talk about how much the ice conditions and the other seasons are changing. And then that sort of expanded into the current work where I guess I travel two worlds. I'm a professional fisherman, but I'm also having a PhD and a foot in the research world. And that's essentially what we try to do in Snow Change, in the sense that there are not many avenues for the communities to try to, whether they are First Nations or other kind of Inuit or others, to convey what they are seeing with their eyes. And I think that's why, from our side, this study in science is so good, because it actually recognizes and points to a dialogue between the traditional knowledge and science. And that's a very positive thing to happen.
One of the words you used a few minutes ago was the redistribution of wildlife, and it kind of haunts me a bit to think what that means. I'm wondering if you can dig a little deeper and explain it.
Yeah, so as I said a little bit earlier, one of the things and one of the sort of blinding factors regarding global warming and climate change is the fact that most of the things we discuss are numbers. It reads like a weather report, essentially. So you'll find people listening to how much mean temperatures will change or things like that. One of the things we wanted to do with this paper is to offer a completely new view, and I think that's why it's getting so much attention, to look at how species, meaning birds, fish, insects, plants, and other things are responding. In other words, the natural world. And this is a mechanism also to try to convey how much and how climate change is having impacts in our life. And we found very disturbing things, including the fact that marine species, like different fish, are moving by 72 kilometers per decade towards the poles, meaning that they are looking for new habitats. And of course, they don't travel in a vacuum. It means that when they come to a new place in the ocean, they are sometimes replacing so-called endemic species, endemic fish, that are dependent on the Arctic or in the Antarctica, the ice or the colder waters. So essentially, we are trying to put this out as a statement that things are now underway that we never have seen before. And this mass movement of species is actually biggest for about 25,000 years since the last ice age. And that's why I think there's another side to the paper which talks about responses. And that's also, in this doom and gloom, very important to keep in mind, that there are things we can take, or action we can take, and steps we can put in place to avoid some of these things.
Let me ask
you. Of course,
No, go ahead.
Of course, one of the sort of iconic things you might see are the polar bears and the loss of sea ice. But actually, I would argue that one of the most direct impacts on human systems might be the insect change that contains potential of mosquitoes carrying malaria. Or there's another very disturbing event going on in Siberian North where due to the permafrost melt, meaning that the ground that's always permanently frozen, which is now thawing, is releasing small